Hello, everyone, and welcome to the OPSWAT Fireside Chat, OT Cybersecurity Outlook 2026 and beyond. I'm Ankita Datta, Product Marketing Manager for OT Solutions here at OPSWAT, and I'm your moderator for today's session. We're thrilled to have all of you join us as we dive into what's shaping the future of OT and critical infrastructure security today. At OPSWAT, our mission is to protect the world's critical infrastructure. We help organizations secure their OT and IT environments through technologies like data diodes, industrial firewalls, secure file transfer and visibility platforms, and much more. So, we are helping ensure safe and compliant operations even in the most sensitive networks. Before we begin, a quick safety moment. As cybersecurity professionals, we talk a lot about protecting systems, but it's just as important to protect people as well. Whether you're in a plant, a control room, or working remotely, always follow physical and digital safety protocols. So make sure you log out, tag out, and securely log off. Now, OT cybersecurity has come a long way, but 2025 has shown us that attackers are getting smarter, faster, and they're increasingly blending IT and OT vulnerabilities. So today we'll reflect on this year's biggest takeaways and look ahead into 2026. So we're basically going to identify what needs to change, what needs to continue, and how organizations can build resilience. Joining me today are our OT and ICS experts. So going around the room, a quick introduction would be great from all of you. Sal?
Thanks, Ankita. My name is Sal Morlando. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for OPSWAT's Data Diode and Security Gateway product line. I've been with OPSWAT for 5 years, and prior to that, I was with a company called Owl Cyber Defense, also in the Data Diode Security Gateway product line.
My name is Dennis Landahan. I've been in cybersecurity since 2007, focused very solely on network segmentation in the form of data diodes and one-way technology, whether that's moving information from OT to IT or IT into OT, or even between peer-to-peer networks. Maintaining network segmentation and confidentiality has been my specialty.
I'm Colin Dunn, General Manager and OT Cybersecurity subject matter expert here. I have a strong background over the last 20 years in engineering and OT, and came over to OPSWAT about a year ago with the acquisition of Fend, which strengthened our data diode product line.
Hola, I am Miguel Fernandez. I am product manager in OPSWAT for secure remote access tools and industrial firewalls, MetaDefender OT Access and MetaDefender Industrial Firewall. And hello, everybody.
Over to you, Mark.
My name is Mark Toussaint. I'm a senior product manager here at OPSWAT. I manage the NetWall line of data diodes and security gateways. I've been in the data diode and security gateway market for just over 8 years.
Welcome to all our speakers. Thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to have a great session today. So I'll stop sharing my screen so that we can start the conversation. So our first topics for today, and I would love to put this question for Sal. We'll start with you. So for organizations that are just beginning their OT cybersecurity journey, what do you think would be their first priority that they should tackle, and why?
Ankita, great question. So most plants, factory, power generation facilities have a wide range of digital assets they deploy in the OT environment, some of varying ages and different revisions, so on. So the single most important starting point is to really understand and take inventory of those assets, right? Understanding, once you have that in place, understanding how those assets are accessed for their data, for supporting the operations. And then when you have that information, the next step is to work towards putting together a risk mitigation plan, understanding the risk profile from your business processes as to how they interact with those assets, and then determine the best way to protect those assets from the various threats that can affect the operation of your business.
Those are some very interesting insights, Sal. So maybe Dennis, over to you. This might be the right question because you're talking to companies on an everyday basis. Many CISOs say the real challenge isn't figuring out where to start, but how to sequence their roadmap. So is there a framework or approach that you've seen work and would recommend?
Yes, I definitely dealt with many customers around the world. And it really all starts with them understanding where they are today and where they want to go. There are plenty of frameworks out there, both here in North America that might include CISA, NERC, the NRC, NIST 2.0 is another framework, and there's plenty of others. ISA, the International Society of Automation 99, 62443. So there's many frameworks out there that an asset owner can adopt. And then the process becomes understanding where they are and where they want to go and be able to map that out intelligently to meet both operational requirements and cybersecurity requirements and also compliance requirements. So there's a lot to consider, and a good solid roadmap from where they are and where they want to go is very important.
Sure. Colin, would you like to add something to this?
Sure, another way of looking at a framework is as little to do with cybersecurity itself, but really more of a risk approach to things. And I like the approach of the consequence-driven cyber-informed engineering, or really just thinking about what in your organization is the most important thing, or what are your most important assets? And then what are the worst things that could happen to maybe take down your automotive plant, for example? And if you look at what are the consequences of something happening, you'll know where to prioritize and where to start your roadmap and say, hey, if for some reason this happens to our factory floor, it's okay because we've elevated all of our equipment, no big deal. You think about protecting against floods, you think about protecting against fire, you think about protecting your employees against accidents and injury. Cybersecurity, especially OT cybersecurity, is just one more layer to look at, but it really is all about where can we make sure we do the most good and prevent the most harm, and start there. And then that's really our highest priority place. That's where you think about, if we need to protect this part of the infrastructure, what do we do to protect it? And that's where you start. You don't start with the technology, you start with what you're trying to protect.
Very true. So just building on top of that, and this question can be to both Colin and Sal. Convincing leadership that OT security matters can be tough. So, what metrics or arguments, according to you, have worked best to secure executive buy-in?
So when you look at most operational environments, they've invested a lot of time and effort over the years to improve and maintain a quality process, maintaining a high quality operational environment, producing products and services at the highest standards that they can provide to their customers. Incorporating cybersecurity should be part of that quality process, right? Cybersecurity can impact the organization's ability to deliver products and goods. It can impact the quality of the product. It can affect supply chain. So incorporating cybersecurity into their overall quality best practices is a pretty good way of approaching the problem of getting them to understand the value of cybersecurity.
And if you think about it in terms of the quality, the market, if something happens to your quality of your products, the market does not care why you now have tainted goods, or you have low quality automotive, or why you might have had downtime. It could have been a natural disaster. It could have been a cyber attack. It could have been disgruntled employees. It could have been any number of things. But that's on you and your organization to take care of your customers. And whether it's an OT cyber attack or a natural disaster, if you aren't ready to respond, if you aren't resilient to all kinds of different threats, your stock price is going to go down, management's going to get fired. And that's actually one of the reasons why a lot of people care about this at all. If you go to a water utility, for example, if there's a boil water notice at the water utility, that's a good time to lose your job if you're at top there. You got to keep the water safe. It does not matter why it's not. You've got to make it drinkable. So it's just one other reason to look at this as part of that quality, as part of that safety, is that the customers don't care what happened to you. They care what happens to them, and they will walk with their wallets and take their business elsewhere.
Very true. So it is integral to any business unit, any initial business planning as well. So moving on, the next segment, I would like to talk a little bit about prioritization and focus. And I would like to put this question before for Dennis. So Dennis, if you had to pick the top 3 focus areas for 2025 in OT cybersecurity, what do you think they would be?
Yeah, from my vantage point, obviously every customer that we have and all the customers I deal with have different concerns. But when it comes down to my own personal concerns about that, I think a threat that is a file-borne threat is probably the most important thing to watch for, because files can come into an organization from many different ways. They can be carried in on a thumb drive. They can be sent in an email. They can be a download from the internet. It could be a partner sending a file. It could be a supplier sending a file. And a file can be extremely malicious, right? Ransomware starts as a file. That's a file-borne attack. And if you're not locked down and secure from that type of an attack, a simple ransomware file and ransomware attack can lock up a lot of your systems and cause a great deal of disruption to the operation. Colin was talking about stock prices earlier, can become a pretty significant issue. So I think mitigating file-borne threats is probably the number one for me. Secure remote access is probably the number two. I talk to customers all the time that need secure remote access. They don't necessarily have all the staff to be at the plant 24/7, 7 days a week for all the shifts, and they need technicians to be able to dial in from the outside. And secure remote access, a threat vector from the outside world that may initiate at the internet or some other connectivity point all the way into your OT operation to access an individual PLC or an individual asset that's down on the shop floor, can be an extreme threat. And it may not necessarily be a bad actor that's causing the problem in and by itself. It could be a third-party vendor that needs to gain access to your system. So having a secure remote access capability that provides for auditing, capability to turn on and turn off and manage what access a particular user has, I think becomes a pretty significant requirement for many customers. And then the part of this industry that I've been most involved in over the last 15, 20 years is that of segmentation of the networks and the use of data diodes to segment data flows to either one way in or one way out. And by that, I mean from OT to IT is one way out data flows, and segment data flows in one way. And the reason this is done is to reduce the threat factor, because now we know individual connections are working a particular way. They're authorized, they're known, they're trusted. And as opposed to just having multi TCP/IP connections going both ways, we can isolate individual pieces of traffic, maintain segmentation of the networks, so the networks don't interact in an open client server method, yet we restrict that to known trusted connections to make sure that the segmentation of the networks and the OT environment stays protected from outside threats and vulnerabilities.
Yep, you mentioned it, Dennis. Thank you for mentioning remote access. Right, remote access is here to stay, definitely. You said we have OEMs, we have integrators, maintenance vendors. All these guys will like to access remotely to OT assets, and this situation comes with great challenges. And increasing the attack surface, making bigger the risk vector. So we are not only talking about remote access, but secure remote access, secure, auditable, and if possible, policy-based remote access. So we don't want only to give operators the capability to connect remotely, but we also need to provide an organization with the capability to see who is connecting and what he is doing and what authorization they have to do all these kind of things, right? You also mentioned segmentation, but I would rather like Sal or Mark to comment something about that.
Yeah, I can jump in on that. I think, Dennis hit the nail on the head in some of the top three focus areas. And, when you look at network segmentation, it's important there are multiple ways to come at segmentation. You could be looking at segmenting your complete OT boundary from your IT boundary, and maybe you're deploying data diodes to do that, or security gateways. But in many instances, we see customers that come to us and they want to protect, a single asset or a single device. So you could be looking at deploying industrial firewalls or data diodes lower in the produce stack. And likewise, many customers not only, want to provide, have that boundary protection or asset protection, but they want to protect against lateral movement. So if something does happen, you can't move across the network to different assets. So certainly, file-borne threats, OT remote access, and then segmentation. It's important to look at, that segmentation comes in many shapes and forms.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's one other point I'd like to add to that. Most organizations have a fairly mature patch management process. This is to keep their systems working properly and being operationally efficient. You need to incorporate cybersecurity best practices into the patch management process as well, both to protect the supply chain, protect the integrity of your systems for the new software executables you're loading. All those should be factored into your risk management plan.
That was very interesting. So I'd like to put a question for Colin. Colin, how do you distinguish between must-haves and nice-to-haves OT controls, especially when budgets are tight?
Well, I think the best way to find that out is to do a test, to test your organization to see what would happen if I lost connectivity. Like, let's forget about ransomware for a minute and other things that might lock up your system. Because that's really all about availability. Like, I cannot use that system because it's been ransomed, but it might be I can't use that system because the connection has been destroyed some way, or it may be otherwise part of a DDoS or something like that. So go through your organization and do some drills. I know of a hospital not too far from us here that once a year, they do a no conductivity drill in the hospital. They say, could we still serve patients if we lost all connectivity? So what do? You unplug the phones, you unplug the computers, you take away the cell phones, and you say, what could we do? And they do their very best. The fact that they do this at all once a year is amazing, because not everybody's doing these drills. But they're yelling down the hall. They're running, like literally running with paper sometimes. The people are in the mechanical plant yelling different temperatures, turn the valve, everything's a manual override. Is it the most energy efficient way of operating? No, but the hospital is still operating. And you know what they found out? They found out they could do just about everything, except they couldn't get medicines to the different floors fast enough. And they realized that this is the hospital designed. It was like during the Jetsons, they had pneumatic tubes. So you put the medicine in the tube, it goes, phoomp, it goes up to the other floors. Lots of other hospitals are built of big, wide hallways where you push carts. And they realized that their hallways are not wide enough to get the patients and the medicine carts down. And so what did they decide? The most critical, irreplaceable thing they had was that pneumatic tube system. And so where did they put their defenses when it was a tight budget? They defended that tube system as strongly as they could, and then they worked their way back out and say that was the most critical piece of equipment. Then what's next? Is it the elevators? That's pretty important. And they moved out from there, but it all had to do with practice. And once you figure out what's really, really important, then you know what's nice to have and what's critical.
So it's almost like a fire drill where you have to be more proactive rather than reactive. So
Absolutely,
yeah.
you have to practice.
So budgets is one topic of conversation, and then the next thing is compliance. And I'd like to put this question for Dennis and Mark. So when compliance requirements clash with operational realities, how do you think teams can balance regulation and security?
Yeah, well, I can start with that. I think that often, customers will confuse compliance with security. While it's important to have compliance, that doesn't always mean that, you have security. There are different ways to come at, things like I just talked about with network segmentation, some methods that are more secure than others, but both methods could keep you in compliance. And I think that, it's important to understand that the cycles of updating compliance regulations is slow. So typically, the regulations, are behind for the actual reality of the threats that are out there today. So I think it's important that, just because you've ticked all your compliance boxes, are you secure is still secure is the question.
Yeah, I think Mark is right on that, because like you said, compliance does not necessarily equal security. And I think Colin gave a great outline of, well, how do we figure out where do we need to be more secure? First and foremost, because security needs to be in place, and yes, compliance needs to be in place. But if you know where you need to be secure, you can then back in, okay, for that particular system or these systems that have to be secure because we know that they're most critical to our operation. Well, how do we fall in line with compliance there? And one of the pieces that has to be taken into consideration here is if too much security is thrown in order to gain a level of compliance, well, you potentially cause a problem now with employees wanting to get their job done. And if security locks them out from being able to do their job, well, we know a lot of employees will be resourceful and they may find another way to get their job done. So you've got to be in balance with the operational needs, how the employees get their work done, the compliance and the security. So nobody's saying that this is an easy task because there's many variables out there in every organization for each one of these systems that need to be secure and they need to be compliant, and employees want to get their jobs done.
That's very interesting. So, a question over to Colin and maybe Sal, Mark, you can also add in here. What are some new challenges that you're seeing that weren't as urgent 2 or 3 years ago?
Well, I can start. A couple of things that we're seeing that, really were not as prevalent, 2-3 years ago. We're starting to see smaller entities, smaller critical infrastructure entities being attacked. I think everyone's got a lot of press with the small water company in Pennsylvania that was hacked and, brought up the issue of using factory default user credentials that opened the door for that attack. I think that, we've also been talking about the convergence of OT and IT for a number of years now, but the pace of that is accelerating. And what that has done is it's really made the businesses much more reliant on the data that we're moving from OT to IT securely. So there's a larger concern with the reliability of that data flow while maintaining security. So we're seeing, customers implementing things like high availability architectures to ensure that if they have a hardware failure or, a network goes down, that that data keeps flowing regardless.
Yeah, I think to add to what Mark said, there was a time when you would look across the critical infrastructure industries and say, well, that's probably more of a high value target. That's gone. I mean, every target is a high value target right now. So every industry is vulnerable. Every industry is in the crosshairs of bad actors. And to complicate that, the accessibility of more sophisticated tools like AI-based tools to create deep fake, cyber threats is becoming more prevalent. So all industries really need to be on their guard.
Yeah, I think Sal, nobody's in AI for 10 whole minutes, so it was about time that you brought that up. I mean, it's not so much that when you think about it, everything's a high value target now. It's because it's so cheap to launch the attacks with AI. You just say, go attack everything AI, and it's just a shotgun approach. And it's sort of like if every boat has leaks, but when you're up at the surface, they don't come in so quickly. It's like AI has pushed all ships to the bottom of the sea, and the pressure, just the ability to get through the smallest crack is so much greater with AI pushing on you. And it's there, whether you're segmented today, but maybe you bring in a thumb drive once in a while, maybe you flip the switch and plug in a network cable once in a while for remote access. These are patient adversaries. They're just sitting there goaltending, waiting for you to do that. And they're just waiting for that moment to strike. And it's cheap, and it does make it, even if the smaller targets might only cough up, a few $100,000 here or there, it's easy money. And yeah, the ability to launch that against just the smallest of targets and have it be cost effective is really the challenge, because it went from being the art of the nation state to the common criminal. Just, I mean, it's harder to be a pickpocket than to launch these AI attacks on utilities anymore. So nobody was talking about this a couple of years ago, but it's here to stay.
And I think the reality of it too, Colin, is that it's not really a person sitting at the keyboard for 10 hours a day looking for threats and vulnerabilities out there, right? They're automated attacks, they're automated responses. And you don't have a person sitting, the image used to be 10, 15 years ago of people sitting down in their basement or sitting in an old warehouse and at the keyboard doing this. And that's not the case anymore, right? We also see interviews where CEOs say, but why me? And the answer is because they could. Not because you're necessarily a high value target, but your systems were open. They were able to get an attack in there, even simple ransomware to collect some sum of money, just because they can, and you were vulnerable.
Very true. And I'm thinking that, Dennis, you mentioned that there are so many different entry points and then so many different things that CISOs, business decision makers need to take into consideration. I'm sure a lot of us are thinking that, is this affordable? Is it too expensive? So let's say I have a budget of $20,000 to allocate before the year end. How should I invest it for maximum OT impact? And we can go around the table here. Miguel, maybe you can start with this and we can have Sal give his inputs as well.
Sure. It's a very specific question, and of course, it will depend a lot on the needs and the security posture of the organization, right? The current situation of their OT. As a easy proposal, what I would suggest is, start. You have only 20 grand, so let's start small. You maybe can have if your weak point is about segmentation, you can mainly take an industrial firewall, ideally integrated with a secure remote access solution, right? So you can build there a nice kit while you are providing secure remote access and segmentation at the same time. And of course, you can in the firewall you can enforce all these policies that you want to have to be sure that your OT assets are secure. And this is probably less than 20K in most of the cases.
Yeah, I think following up on Miguel's comment, once you have a well-established risk mitigation plan, which again takes into consideration your business operations, then you could apply the technology that essentially gives you the biggest bang for the buck, right? So if you have a remote asset that you're protecting and you use a lot of remote access, you need that for both your internal resources and your outside vendors, then securing and implementing a secure remote access facility is the right first step. If you standardize around using portable media to move files in and out or move data in and out, then you can apply technologies that are going to scan those files and secure the movement of files using portable media. So I think there's a number of things you can do as a first step, which really adhere to your business process and secures how you're currently operating your infrastructure.
So just continuing on to that conversation, and I would like to put this for Mark, and maybe Sal, you can add on to this as well. So how can technologies that focus on segmentation, so like firewalls, data diodes, how can they be rolled out in phased or budget conscious deployments?
Well, I think in terms of network segmentation, now there's I mentioned earlier, there's a whole range of options and types of segmentation that you can deploy. Some of the biggest bang for the buck would be securing a network perimeter where anything behind it, is secured with unidirectional technology. So data can flow out, but nothing can get back in. And the other thing, from a budget conscious standpoint, some of these unidirectional technologies, gateways and data diodes, historically have been expensive and difficult to implement. And that's all changed. So there's a really broad range of, price points and performance levels out there that didn't exist, even 2 to 3 years ago. So, there's a lot of wherewithal depending on budget constraints to, find solutions that not only meet your budget, but provide you with that, level of security that you need.
Sal, would you like to add something to this?
Yes, as Mark said, segmentation is an important part of an overall strategy. You can start with essentially creating a perimeter defense around your OT assets and segmenting between OT assets and IT assets. But progressing, or adding more security, you can use firewalls and other lower cost diodes to do segmentation within the OT environment in compliance with IEC 62443. This way, you're preventing the propagation of an insider threat, for example, from impacting more than one operating zone. There's a number of strategies you can follow, and taking sort of a top-down approach is probably the right way of doing it.
Sure. So there are a lot of options, a lot of pricing options, and
Yeah.
available solutions as well in the market coming up. So I think, Dennis, quick question over to you. So what are some common mistakes, spending mistakes that you've seen organizations make?
Yeah, I think the number one spending mistake they can make is making a decision to buy something or to implement something and not understanding the full scope of the use case. And by that, I mean, part of what I do in my job is I help customers understand the use cases. What are they trying to get done? What are all the different data flows? How do the data flows move? What are the different systems that need to be connected? How do we need to secure those? And then another very important aspect of this is who are the stakeholders within the organization? And on my side of the business where I'm dealing with OT customers, I'm traditionally dealing with three sets of people to make any decision. There's the OT staff that are responsible for running the plant. There's the IT staff that's responsible for being able to share data within the connected enterprise. And then there's the security team overlay that's responsible for making sure that security gets implemented within those systems. And again, I go back to, I think the biggest mistake they can make is making this a decision without all the facts and without all the stakeholders having some input. And I'm going to give you a couple cases of an example here. I was recently out at a large power generation station, and they're evaluating data diodes for their architecture and their implementation for secure segmentation between IT and OT. We were there on site with the customer for 2 days. And it was fantastic to see that the company invested in 9 of their staff members, both OT and IT and security, to be available for 2 full days for us to help them with needs assessment and configuration of security solutions around those use cases and help them figure that out, right? And for 9 people from the organization to have been there for 2 days, that's a pretty significant investment. And that tells me the customer's going about it the right way. They're studying the use cases, the data flows, the systems, who needs to use the information in what particular network, and they have the staff there to do the evaluation. And it's just as important for them to understand what a solution will do as much as what a solution will not do.
That's a very interesting point, Dennis. And we've been talking budget. Of course, there are business leaders, business decision makers who are thinking, after all of this investment, what is the ROI from this? So Mark, question over to you. When leadership asks for ROI metrics, how do you measure metrics or success of diodes and gateways?
Yeah, well, I think sometimes customers look at some of their security solutions as being too expensive, but the repercussions of, what's the result, the loss of revenue if your systems go down for X number of days. I think most of our OT customers have an idea of what those costs are and what the consequences of that are. But, even on top of that, if you have an incident, what is the impact to your stock price? What is the impact, to the safety of your employees? And, likewise, the, what from a public relations standpoint, if you have an incident, what does that mean to your business, and basically tailoring that back to the stock price. So and there's different ways to look at ROI. Like when we deploy data diodes versus firewalls, data diodes have a lower total cost of ownership. We have in the diode business, we use a term, set it and forget it. And they don't require as much patching as firewalls, where, firewalls they have a place in a defense in-depth architecture, but they can be time consuming to keep them patched and, all the rules up to date. So, there's ways to look at the technologies that you bring in, may have a lower total cost of ownership that contribute to the return on investment.
And also for all our attendees who are trying to figure out how to secure an OT cybersecurity budget, Colin, maybe you can help answer this. What if they're not able to secure a OT cybersecurity budget? How would they start from ground zero?
Well, there's a couple of places to look for money. One is if you're part of the organization and you feel like everything you do is project-based, it's not like you're the IT department and they always get the same amount of money plus a little bit more every year. And that seems to be how they get their money. It always grows. But if you're a part of it, it's like, I need to do an equipment upgrade. Oh, okay. Well, one, we need to know what we're doing and what is the payback period? Is that going to pay for itself? Do we really need this machine, or can we go a little bit less efficiently? And if your organization has some cost of capital or some payback period above which, if it takes too long, they're not going to say yes, and below which you're like, oh, yes, we must do the project. There's a lot of organizations like that. Even government agencies say, if it's a payback period of X number of years or shorter, we're going to do it. Something that I've seen in other industries is to bundle different technologies to make that overall payback period attractive. So instead of saying, I want to get new elevator controls and the payback period for that based on maintenance cost is going to be for 3 years. It's payback in 3 years. But I also want to improve my cybersecurity for my facility related control systems. That's either harder to quantify or that's going to take, 10 years, for example, depending on that example. If you bundle them together and you say, hey, as a larger project, controls project, I have a payback period of 5 years and that's below my organization's threshold, consider bundling those projects together to get some of those approved. The larger projects with an overall better payback period. The second place to look is your cyber insurance policy. Now, a lot of companies years back said, we should probably go get a cyber insurance policy. Now, this was in an era where maybe the insurance companies are actually going to pay out in the event of an attack. That's actually increasingly rare. But let's say you have a policy that is going to pay out. You've done everything right. You've contacted the insurance before doing everything else. You might look at that policy, and when you got it, it might say, oh, you have a policy of $10 million. Oh, well, that may have seemed like a whole lot 5 years ago or 10 years ago, but now it happens so often, and the consequences of ransomware are so much higher that you might say, oh my goodness, if it's more than $10 million, what happens? Oh, it comes out of our bank account. Oh, we can't float that. And so you say, okay, well, if that's not enough coverage, what is enough coverage? If you work with management, they say, well, maybe it should be 50 million. And then you go say, hey, well, to go from a $10 million policy to a $50 million policy is this amount of money. But maybe if you put that money into protective technologies, into better cybersecurity, the risk of that $50 million payout is quite a bit lower. And there's a chunk of money right there that you could either pay to the insurance companies or you could actually reduce the risk of an event happening. And that's another way of finding some budget with your management team.
That's a very interesting point, Colin. Thank you for that. I'd like to shift gears a little bit here. We've spoken budget. The next big thing is regulations and standards. So I'd like to put this question for Dennis. You spoke about NIST, you spoke about IEC. So how do you see the likes of NIST2, NERC CIP, IEC, etc., shaping OT security strategies going into 2026?
Yeah. So as I heard many years ago from a cybersecurity expert, one of his main tenets when he presented and spoke to people was pick a framework and stick with it. Get to know it, get to understand it. And in a framework like NIST and many others, right, there's 6 basic tenets that really outline what you're trying to do within a cybersecurity roadmap, right? The first one is governance. What are we trying to do? What is our program? What is our strategy? High level, where are we? Where are we going? Number 2 is how do you identify the risks, whether it be hardware or software or individual systems or people or suppliers. So understanding those risks, and I think Colin did a great job of outlining some of those risks with his hospital example of what are the risks, and one risk being, what if we turn it all off? What can we do, right? A third tenet on that is protect. How do we protect ourselves? What are the safeguards? What do we need to put in place to safeguard those risks, whether they're hardware, they're software, they're people? People, big part about securing people is training, right? So they understand what they need to do and how they need to go forward. It's not always just about technology to solve the problem. People many times can cause the problem. So people training is a really important aspect of what needs to be done there to protect. A fourth tenet there to follow through on the standards is detect. How do we detect what's taking place in our systems? What's the backup plan if particular systems go down? And Colin, again, going back to his hospital example, outlaid a perfect example of how they went through the risk mitigation to understand where their strengths and their weaknesses were. And then, so, you know, when you respond, then how do we mitigate the problems? How do we keep the operation going? And again, I go back to Colin's great example at the hospital. Is one of their major responses is we got to keep the tubes up and running so we can deliver medicine to the different floors. So response is important to build out that plan so people know what their actions and responsibilities are. And then the last tenet involved in this is, how do you recover? Now that we know what's taking place, we're mitigating the problems. What is ultimately the final recovery plan to return our systems back to where they need to be now in this new state after an attack? So those are the primary tenets: governance, identification, protect, detect, respond, and recover.
Those were some great insights on compliance, Dennis. So adding on to that question, maybe to Sal and Mark as well, do you think regulations are currently keeping pace with evolving threats? Is there a lag? Is there anything that could change?
Well, I think technology is evolving so quickly. We mentioned AI in the past, and you know, AI being used to create sophisticated threats. Regulations are going to attempt to keep up, right? But I think you need to start with the established frameworks that you have today. Make sure that you're doing the right things to secure your supply chain, to properly segment your network, to make sure that you have a well engineered patch management process. So all the things that are currently in the NIST frameworks, the CISA framework, you know, as Dennis said, pick one, implement it, and have it working well with your current operation. I think those are the steps you can take today that'll really lay the groundwork for a secure environment. And then as technologies evolve, like AI, right, it's easier to, you know, incrementally add the security measures you need to protect against the more sophisticated attacks.
Yeah, I think, you know, Sal and Dennis make good points. I mean, you know, regulations tend to lag. If you look at example NERC CIP, you know, you're talking cycles for updating regulations in years, not months. And so, you know, one of the things that Dennis talked about, pick a framework and stick to it. I think that's really important, but I think it's also important for industries that lack any kind of regulation and framework. I'll use the example of the water wastewater industry, and, you know, again, some of the high-profile attacks that have happened. Often, you know, I'll tell customers that, you know, even if you are not in a regulated industry like the nuclear power generation, like NERC CIP power gen customers, you know, it's important for organizations, you know, to select a framework and implement it. You know, we see a lot around the world where specific countries may not have, you know, their own regulations, but they'll use NERC CIP as a guideline, because those, you know, the guidelines of NERC CIP are relevant to all critical infrastructure, you know, industries. It's not really just generate, you know, to power. So yeah, I think it's important to, you know, for industries that are not heavily regulated, you know, to jump on and pick a framework and implement it.
Sure. And just adding on to that, we've spoken about IEC, NERC CIP. All of these the regulations can sometimes be overwhelming, complicated as well. So Dennis, question to you, what advice would you give to smaller organizations that are finding these compliance regulations overwhelming?
Yeah, so I think what they need to do is they really need to step back a bit and understand that compliance, again, does not equal cybersecurity. And I think part of what they need to figure out is what is their program after? and what is the roadmap they're going to put together to get there. There is no one single silver bullet of one particular solution that's going to solve all these problems. So they've got to sit down logically and think through what's the roadmap for implementation. One, to meet regulations, compliance regulations, and two, to provide additional cybersecurity that's actually meaningful. And for each asset owner out there, that's an individual journey, right? There's no one endpoint. You have a beginning, and you're going to continue to move through your organization week over week, month over month, year over year, implementing additional things. Budgets come into play, audits come into play, and building a roadmap so you understand where you are and where you're going is probably the single most important thing, so they can wrap their arms around the monumental project they have in front of them and systematically do what they can do against a plan and know where they are against that plan.
Thank you so much for that, Dennis. So moving on, the last few segments, I'd like to talk a little bit about the threat landscape and lessons that we've learned from 2025 and before. So looking back at some of the biggest OT hacks of 2024, 2025, and before this, I'd like to cover and get more insights on what are the most important lessons that we've learned, and are there any expected new tactics or attackers that we're expecting going into 2026. So would love to get views from Colin, Dennis, and Sal on this.
Sure. So I think one thing that we saw at scale this year was really the impact of supply chain vulnerabilities. And this isn't just counterfeit chips and things. And if you look at a bunch of smart IoT devices, and this can be chillers at hospitals, I mean, this can be power plant equipment, so much of what powers the modern world is hooked up or is running on somebody else's server, and it depends on somebody else's gadget being attached to this cloud service, to this AI service. But AI on top of all this, with all the AI learning from all the other AI, and then it's just so connected. And there are so many folks now that are running operations that are increasingly reliant on AI to help them. They don't even know how these systems are hooked up to each other. There are some folks that have years and years on the plant floor, and they know how to operate in the before times. And it happens to so many organizations at the same time. The good guys can't even swoop in and help clean stuff up. There's just too many victims. So just make sure you know how your stuff works and what's connected to what. And don't treat an AWS outage or an AI hallucination like an act of God. It's just another Tuesday. It's going to happen again next week.
Yeah, a slightly different take on that. I think Colin's right when he talks about the big attacks. But from my vantage point, the biggest attack out there is the one that happens to you, that impacts your business. And there are a lot of attacks that happen that don't even make the paper anymore. I mean, ransomware is so old hat. If somebody gets hit with ransomware, be it a school district or a telecommunications facility for law enforcement, those hardly even make the news anymore. But that's the biggest attack that you're going to deal with, is the one that impacts you, right? So having this framework of knowing what happens, how am I going to recover? How am I going to keep my business in operation? It really becomes the piece that they need to watch for, because the big grandiose ones will always be there. But the one that impacts you is going to have the most impact. And that's what you've got to guard out for and watch out for.
Yeah, just to add to that, OT environments are becoming more complicated, and that's going to open up threat vectors. So if you look at some industries now, you have a widely distributed OT environment. You have mobile assets that are essentially OT environments on tracks or wheels that are all interconnected. So this is complicating the ability to protect these assets using, what we thought were sort of the more traditional approaches. Putting a firewall at the boundary, so on. So this is another area that I think is another area that is going to be exploited more readily in the future, and that asset owners need to understand and develop ways of protecting it. So, how do you distribute patches securely to a distributed environment? or for that matter, mobile assets, right? We have to solve that problem. How do you isolate and, segment what amounts to a bunch of distributed assets that are connected over a wide area network? Again, those are problems that, have to be solved. And you can solve them with conventional technology because we've done the right kind of job in terms of, making lower cost efficient data diodes and security gateways and other products like that. But it's a matter of reaching out and making sure that customers understand that they can deploy these things at scale in an efficient way.
Yeah, and with all of these threats evolving so fast, which threat categories should operators ideally prioritize defenses against right now? Colin, could you share some views on this?
I think this goes back to Dennis's comment. It's the ones that impact you. I mean, when it comes down to it, you need to know what's the backup plan when this thing fails and when that thing fails. What's our backup plan for absolutely everything, whether it's the motor controllers, whether it's the door locks, whether it's the elevators. Like, do you want your boss to be like, so how come our factory doesn't work today? Oh, I couldn't get the smart door locks to open. Like, is that what you want to be on your tombstone? No, have a backup plan because it could be absolutely anything in your infrastructure. So know how to get around that. And then if there's something in your infrastructure where you've got no other plan, like this has got to be straight up on the internet, prioritize whatever would attack that. Are you worried about ransomware? Are you worried about file-based threats? That is how you prioritize. If you got stuff that you have no backup plan for, protect that baby.
Yeah, and we're talking about threats and attacks. Taking a step back, ideally when we're looking at threat detection, this often misses early signals. So if you're thinking of how organizations can improve here without overloading teams, maybe Mark, could you add some points to this?
Yeah, I look at threat detection inside OT environments as part of a defense in depth approach. The nature of a threat detection is once something's detected, it's already happened. But they're, good tools to look, to protect against insider threats and things like that. You have, machine learning technologies that can learn what the normal data flows are, and then, inspect those data flows and then, identify anomalies when they occur. So part of a defense in depth solution, I think that, when I talk to customers, I think that we talk a lot about the unidirectional technologies, gateways and data diodes, particularly in the case of data diodes. We're enforcing unidirectional data flow one way, and diodes are governed by the laws of physics. So there's no return path into the OT network. So you can ensure that you get your data out, but nothing can ever get in, which sort of, mitigates that need to some degree for threat prevention technologies. But again, part of a defense in depth strategy. We see customers. I went to a conference several years ago, and one of the speakers was doing the exercise, like Dennis said, understanding your data flows, inventorying your data flows, and they found that they had something like 231 data flows out of OT. And they had no idea that there were that many data flows and how many vendors were coming in. There were data flows that they no longer used, that they left open ports exposed. So, again, that whole defense in depth, and if we look at the data flows, understand what they are, and deploy certain technologies to try to ensure that nothing gets in. And then protect against insider threats with technologies like machine learning and threat detection.
Thank you, Mark. So to all our attendees, a quick note, we at OPSWAT understand the challenges of managing large, complex industrial networks. So you have a lot of things to do, from identifying the right cybersecurity tools to spotting hidden gaps. So we've created a very short readiness assessment, which is designed to help you gauge where your organization stands today and what areas might need focus. So you can head over to the chat section or the resources section to see the link for this page. We'll give you a few minutes, a few seconds to experiment, play around with it. It's a questionnaire which will take you approximately 2 minutes to go through. and you'll receive your readiness check results once you fill in the form. So with that, moving over to our last segment, I'd like to talk a little bit about deployment and adoption. And I'll put this question for Miguel and Mark. So we've seen that many OT deployments actually fail because they're sometimes too complex. So what do you think are a few ways in which vendors or integrators can simplify adoption?
Let me start with this one, Mark, please. Well, many OT solutions, many OT deployments fails. The first main reason is because sometimes we don't understand very well what we exactly have. So this is something that Dennis, Colin, Sal, Mark, everybody has mentioned already. You have to know your OT first to know your data flows, your assets, and to prioritize what do you really need to protect first, right? In that way, you will be doing a much more cleaner deployment than if you are not doing that. No, so in OT, simplicity is not something nice to have, right? It's actually, I consider it as a security feature itself. So the most easy, the more easy your system is, the less steps your operators needs to take, the fewer chances you have for misconfigurations or problems, right? So at the end of the day, the idea is to have kind of a concept like plug and protect, right? So tools that allows you to deploy in a transparent way whatever you want without making dramatic changes or re-architecture your network, not the few IP changes or not performing routing changes. If you can have these kind of tools, that kind of systems to help you to protect, to make segmentation, I think is the best way to make the deployment easier and to succeed doing it.
Yeah, I'd like to bring up a different component of this, and a lot of it, we've covered about prioritization, identifying, what are the most critical assets that need to be replaced, what is the most severe consequences if something is compromised. But I see all the time customers contract for security audits, and the security audit vendors come back with a laundry list of 50 different items, and it can be overwhelming. And also, if you try to deploy cybersecurity solutions to address all of those 50 components, you may wind up with a system that's overly complex, and the implementation is not successful. So I think going back, it's important that out of say that list of 50 things, that customers prioritize what are the top 3, what are the top 5, because in all likelihood in the next year they may not get to 50 components of that security audit. And so in some regards, it's if you do the correct prioritization, it's good to not be as ambitious as saying I've got to do all these 50 things in the next year. Focus again on the top priorities and implement solutions that are easy to deploy, intuitive, and hit some of the most critical priorities versus trying to do everything immediately.
And Mark, are there any approaches or tools that succeed with minimal disruption in these critical environments?
Well, I think, as I mentioned before, things like data diodes and security gateways used to be perceived as being expensive and difficult to deploy and complex. That's all changed. The data diodes and gateways can be deployed, for certain use cases in, a matter of, hours versus days historically. So, again, the technologies have evolved to the point that deployment has become, a lot easier. In fact, most of our deployments on our diode and gateways, our customers do by themselves with minimal interaction from OPSWAT, whereby, you go back in my years in the diode business 5 years ago, when we'd have people on site 2, 3, 4 days to do a single implementation.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mark and Miguel, for those insights. So I think we've had a lot of discussions about this. So we can start wrapping up now. And I'll open this up to the entire panel. If you had one prediction to make for OT cybersecurity going into 2026, what would this be? And maybe we can go Sal and Mark, Colin, Dennis, and Miguel.
Yeah, I mean, the easy prediction is the number of threats that we're going to experience in 2026 is not going to go down. They're going to continue to go up. And as we discussed, there really is no safe target, right? Every target is going to be viewed as a high value target.
Yeah, I think that, as I touched on the convergence of OT and IT, as our OT systems get more sophisticated, they produce more data. The business side, the IT business side, corporate, will have greater reliance on the data. So it becomes more important as time goes on, but it's more important to get that data in a secure manner. And the amount of data that will continue, to be moved out of OT will only continue to grow and grow and grow. So, and that reliance on that data, to the corporate network will only continue to explode.
My prediction is smaller in scale. My prediction is that someone's going to buy just perfect piece of cybersecurity technology for their OT environment. And somebody during a crisis is going to be protected by it because the thing that they bought and put in that cabinet, they also wrote a note and attached some information about what this thing is, why you shouldn't unplug it, and who to talk to if you have a question about it. And they're going to stick it right there, and someone's going to read it, and they're going to leave it alone, and it's going to save the day. So make sure your team knows what you've done, knows what it's for, that it's all written down, that nobody bypasses this stuff. My prediction is that people who do that are going to be the heroes, and they didn't realize they've already done the heroic act by doing that documentation.
Yep, absolutely, Colin. No doubt about that. So my prediction of where things are going is, and a lot of it's going to come back for me, is going to come back to AI. AI is here. AI for good and AI for bad. And we have to deal with both sides of the fence. So AI for bad is what really scares me, because pretty soon, and even today, some will say you can no longer distinguish between the actual and the fake. And in the world of advanced persistent threats, and I'm going to use a line that Colin uses all the time, and I'm going to use it because he hasn't said it yet, is that these advanced persistent threats have the focus of a laser beam on particular systems, and they have the patience of a landmine just waiting to go off. And that's the advanced persistent threats that we've got to deal with today. And you need a plan to handle it, to understand it, to mitigate it, to recover from it.
I was about to mention something similar that Dennis said, right? AI is here, and AI is going to be applied for social engineering attacks. So I think it's really, really important for us to understand this and to learn how to protect us against that kind of attacks.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much to all our panelists today for this amazing session. So without much further ado, we'll wrap up this session. Thank you to all our panelists today for joining. This was amazing, and we hope to see you again soon.